Hello, this is Hugo Prévost, and you're listening to SVGA, your PC retro gaming podcast. With me, as always, from Ontario this time, Robert Hills. Hello, Robert.
Hello, Hugo. Nice to be back.
Yeah, nice to have you back. It's been a while.
It has been a while. It's been. I mean, the listeners can't see because obviously they're hearing things, but I'm surrounded by boxes still because I've just moved.
Yeah, it's the fun thing with moving. It's always longer than you think it will take. It's always surprises, always problems.
Oh yeah. But I won't get into it, but oh yes.
Yeah, but at least, well, your internet is plugged in. You have your mic out.
Actually, that was one of the incredible things. The internet worked exactly when it was supposed to. The night we arrived, the technician didn't even need to come in. I just plugged it in. It was fine.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's what we like. So yeah, today it's another of our DLCs or additional content, if we can call it that. We did the first one on flight controls. If you want, you can have a listen just after listening to this, of course. And the second one was an interview I did with one of the creators of a game called Songs of Conquest. But now today we go, well, the one I say we go back to modern times, we go forward. I don't know how it works. We are going to talk about one, I think, of our favorite games. What are we talking about today, Robert?
We are talking about Hearts of Iron 4.
Hearts of Iron 4, indeed. A game, I have to say, I have a bit of a love-hate relation with.
I think that is an extremely good way of putting it. I am very ambivalent about this game.
But still, we have a few hundred hours sunk in it.
Well, that's the problem.
So, before we get too deep into it, maybe do you want to try to tell what exactly is Heart of Iron? It's what they call, I think it's 4X. 4X. Is it 4X or just grand strategy? I don't know if there's a difference.
I've always kind of thought of it as grand strategy, but I don't know that I'm correct there. So it may be 4X. But in any case, it's a grand strategy game in either the technical or just the literal sense, in that it's the Second World War. You start in 1936 or 1939 if you want to go quickly, and you pick a country and you see if you can make it to the end of the war, and you control everything from individual sort of armies all the way up to how much cheese is sold at your stores back in the home front. So it's intense. There is everything. There's a lot to learn, and it's also a game that once you get into it, you get really into it, and then like days, nights evaporate, just gone.
Yeah. Oh, those nights, man. I have one anecdote. It's completely crazy. So it's developed by Paradox Interactive, who are specialized in that sort of games. They did Crusader Kings. Well, they still do them. It's the third game just came out a few months back. They also did the Europa Universalis series and what was the fourth one? I think there's a fourth one. So, they did Stellaris too.
Yeah, Stellaris. I think they did Napoleonic one, March of Eagles, which... and then there's Victoria, the 19th century.
The Victoria series. So they do a bunch of series of historical games where you control armies, economies. Basically, if you want to have something going from medieval times to the far future, you have something you can take from Paradox. They also did Imperator Rome.
Right,
yeah.
Yes.
So going even farther back, and they do so many games, we're starting to lose track. So you see how it is. It's all based, like you said, on the same concept, is you control basically everything. Of course, the mechanics will change from game to game. I think, for example, the Victoria series is more centered around the economics, to maybe the opposite. Hearts of Iron 4 is more centered around the combat. There's still a good chunk of economy to control, of course, but you won't. For example, in Victoria, you can produce different types of items. You can clothing, for example, or guns, or food. In Heart of Iron, you don't have to worry about food. Well, not unless you install mods. But we'll get into mods maybe a bit later. So basically it's more you develop your economy, you develop your armies, and then when the Second World War starts, or maybe even before that, if you play as Japan, for example, you can just unleash your armies on the enemy and try to basically annihilate everyone else and conquer the whole. Well, there's no obligation to conquer the whole world, but you can try to do it. It's just going to be very, very long.
Yes. Well, and that's kind of like the best thing about it is also maybe the worst thing about it is how involved it is, how you can micromanage an army, sort of like individual little battalions, like territory by territory. You can do that yourself, or you can leave it up to, you set a few, strategic aims with different attack points, and the armies do it themselves. And it's, you can really dive deep though. And it can suck you in. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, where did your interest for Second World War come from?
Well, I think the short answer is my grandfather was in the Second World War. So that's...
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. He never actually flew over Germany, but he flew in bomber planes essentially. So that's always kind of been around. So, that's, and it's also just culturally, I think the Second World War is very kind of present in everything. So,
yeah, I understand. I think my grandparents were too young to fight in the war. I think my grandfather was 6, when the war ended. So never really knew the war itself. We never was old enough to enlist, of course. But yeah, so it's like you said, culturally, it's something very, very present, at least in our part of the world.
Yeah.
And it's also the fact that they constantly have new documentary series about Hitler, about the Nazis, about the Second World War, about the periods that comes before or just after that. And the fact that I think you still today you see the consequences of what happened in Second World War, North and South Korea, for example, and the strategic opposition between the East and the West, everything that happened, of course, during the Cold War, starting 1945, going to 1991 or 2021, as
depending on how
you want to describe it. But yeah, so, and I think this combines with the fascination of just controlling everything. It's not like Command and Conquer where you have one resource that you mine and you build 30 tanks, maybe not even 30 tanks, 20 tanks and a couple of soldiers, and just send them destroy the enemy's base. And it's about 1 kilometer away on the map. It's your friends. Yeah. You have to build up your army, your production capacity, and then you have to, I have to conquer Germany. And now, now I'm at war with the Soviets. And so now I have to go from Paris to Moscow, and so on and so on. I think I never saw this scale before, I think, in a game.
No, and usually in this kind of game, like I think Company of Heroes is a good sort of like that sort of StarCraft kind of real-time strategy. It's much sort of smaller. You'll have, a base and 15, 20, 40 unit, like not a ton of units. Whereas this is, you're not just researching the next tank, you're also getting the production line going. Yeah. You are sort of allocating a number of factories. You're as they keep going, they get more efficient, and there's all sorts of wheels within wheels within wheels. Yeah. That then, which will, we may as well just get into it. When you start getting DLCs, they start adding not just countries and updating sort of objectives and focus trees and all this stuff. You start getting new technologies and new sort of game mechanics that add to old game mechanics, and all of a sudden, a game that I probably watched 2 or 3 hours of YouTube videos just to grasp the basics of. You have to just keep learning more and more and more until eventually, and this is, I sort of lost touch with the game for a bit, and now it's just so overwhelming to figure out how I get back into it because the sort of massive game mechanics expand so much further.
Yeah, and I think it's both a positive and a negative point from Paradox is that they put out so much more content every damn time. It's you have your, for example, staying with Heart of Iron, you have your base game, which has already many things, but eventually you have, I think it was different ways to control. You kind of set up puppet governments, and then it's, there's new stuff to do for Balkan countries, for example, and then it's, there's a complete rework where the oil that you extract from the ground is not used anymore directly into the production of tanks, for example, but will be consumed every time you move an army with vehicles. And then you have to think about your oil supply, and then you have to think about your convoys if you import this oil from the other side of the ocean, and so on and so on. And then they add, there's going to be espionage, and then
now, naval. You gotta now. You have to. Yeah. Your navies have to have admirals, and it essentially at a certain point you have to micromanage everything. And I think that's kind of when I lost touch with the game, was that it was just it was too much to. At a certain point, I couldn't even casually obsess about it. It was either I have to put everything I have into it, or I just have to let it go.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those games where you have to, you can still play the base game.
Yeah.
You're maybe going to be bored, I don't know. But there's also, the problem is that there's paid content and then there's free updates. But usually the free updates kind of take into account the fact that you'll have all the previous paid updates, and maybe not, but I never tried to do that because I have this feeling that I'm going to miss out if I don't buy all the DLCs. And then you talked about the navies. It has been so much reworked that I don't even really care anymore. Is that I'm going to just build a bunch of submarines and then try to sink everything the enemy has and sink his convoys and ships, and then that's going to be okay for me. And I won't bother about building battleships, light cruisers, destroyers, customizing everything.
And then deciding, how many guns they have, what sort of armor.
And Jesus Christ, it's so much. There's entire games based on the navies alone, and there's entire games based on tank combat alone. And then you have to mix everything in, and there's also, for example, a way to customize the composition of your armies. And how many divisions, what type of equipment they have. And once again, this is one part of 50 parts maybe. And what I end up doing is just, I'm going to follow that YouTuber's suggestion and just put 7 infantry battalions and 2 artillery battalions in my division.
Yeah.
And that's going to be it. The 7-2s they talk about on YouTube, just use that. It's very powerful. It works. You can try to be funky. You can try other stuff, but basically 7-2, and that's it. That's all you need. And I think it's so much complicated that you miss out on the fun, maybe.
Yeah, well, and that's sort of again why I put, like, I think my Steam count got messed up because I moved from a Mac to a PC and it dropped it. But like, I think I have well over 100, maybe 200 hours on this game.
I have over 200 hours as well. And
I don't think I played in 6 months, because at a certain point it was like, I'd open it up. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, so I got this naval stuff, and like, oh, espionage, what do I do? And you end up, you're just, every time you open it, you're not playing it. You're just like, okay, well, how do I do this? What am I doing with that? why do I want to do this? You know what? Forget it. I'm just going to go back to the way I'd play it before and like fuck all this other stuff.
I mean, you don't have to use espionage, for example. You don't have to, but it's there, and it can be useful. And I don't know. Sometimes it's a bit, well, lots of the time it's overwhelming, and just have to, okay, I'm gonna play it that way, and then it doesn't work, and you're frustrated, and you close the game.
Exactly. Or you just, sometimes I've opened it like, oh, there's all this stuff, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to do something else. Like I don't have like time to spend 3 hours learning a thing and then like, oh, well, I guess I'm just going to go to bed now. Like,
yeah, I have a couple of anecdotes. The first one is I bought the game for a friend. The entire, well, not the very last DLC, but everything before. And I bought it for him, and I sent it as a gift on Steam. And I tried to explain the game to him.
Yeah.
And it took 2 hours, and we only did the menus. 2 hours.
Yeah.
And I tried to find, because the tutorial in the game as you playing as Italy, which has the one of the worst, what they call focus tree, which is a bunch of bonuses you can get, or objectives, or modifiers, and so on. And it's one of the worst focus trees of the game because it hasn't been redone since 2016. And so as you play as Italy, but it's extremely basic. And if you want to just know how the base game works, I found a bunch of tutorials on YouTube. It's 7 videos of 30 minutes each. And this is just for the base game. And this is the kind of game where it can be extremely daunting to try to get into now. Because even at the time, even when it was even in 2016, even when it came out, I needed to watch for about 10 or 15 hours of videos in order to understand what the people are doing in the video, how the game works, how can I change stuff in my own game, how can I be better. And I don't know if I would recommend the game now unless you're ready to spend 10, 20, 30 hours just watching people play.
Yeah.
And that's either the mark of a game so niche, so extraordinary, but so niche that only a few people will understand, or a game so badly designed that only a few people will understand.
Yeah, well, I feel like at this point, if you haven't played Hearts of Iron, you're probably not going to.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like, because it had a really steep learning curve to begin with, and now, like, I don't even know.
I mean, I guess it's easy to it's easy to play as a non-naval nation, for example.
Yeah.
It's easy to start as, if you want to play the Soviet Union, for example, you don't really have to build a navy, because if you play as what they call historical focuses, is that the game tries to follow the historical path of events, and then you won't need a fleet to fight against Germany. Germany is going to come to you through Poland in 1941 at the latest, unless it starts earlier, but usually it's 1940, 1941, Germany invades the Soviet Union. So you won't need a navy to fight in the Ukraine. But you can, if you want to play as Britain or Japan, oh God, it's really something else.
I've never really been able to play as any, like, I either play as France or the Soviet Union, where it's just, France, you just try and survive. And then if you hold on long enough, you can eventually just push the Germans back. Kind of fun. Or you play as the Soviet Union, where same sort of thing is you basically just have to get your economy in line, fix your sort of units enough that you can hold off long enough, and then kind of ride it out and push back. And you don't need to deal with navies. You just, whatever's in the queue at the start, you just let it build and just let it.
I mean, there's probably someone somewhere listening to us right now saying, "Oh, a bunch of ignorance or noobs certainly. Or whatever." But I think the game is a commercial success. Well, in the eyes of Paradox. They sold, I think, as for according to the Wikipedia page, they did sell about 1.3 million copies
Wow.
around last year. So for a grand strategy game without any great graphics, because it's mostly menus, I mean, it's still better looking than Hearts of Iron 3, but
it's got nice illustrations. It's got a nice sort of vibe to it. It works well.
Yeah, but it's mostly menus. So and numbers and circles and numbers in different colors, and it's all numbers. But yeah, it's, I don't know. I don't know why we keep going back at it. I mean, it's been 20 minutes, and I think my impression is that we've all what the entire thing we did was having hearing of grievances. I mean, it's not.
Yeah, but at the same time, like, I've had so much fun with the game where you start and you can. It's really weird the way it takes up hours of your time and it just doesn't feel like anything at all. Like you're just you keep grinding through trees and you're pushing armies, and it's actually like really an engrossing game once you figure it out. It's just getting to that point and staying up to date with it can be very difficult. And sort of my problem is I've come to the point where I had a grasp of the game, like not a great one. Like I never really played multiplayer except for against you once or twice. Yeah. But I was able to understand the game enough to get into a single player game, play a campaign through, and face some adversity, get through it or not, and actually be able to know what I was doing and keep doing it. And then at a certain point, I put it down for a month or two, came back, like 2 DLCs had come out, and I was just like over my head.
Yeah, I see what you mean. But yeah, it's something, I think maybe it's the fact that you can rewrite your story, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
You can decide to, there's a bunch of modifiers you can use in the game. You can decide to play as the Soviets and then push Germany to have a civil war and then become monarchist or communist, if you want, or democratic, and just try to, instead of defending against the Nazis, invade China, for example, or just fight Japan. And I remember doing a non-historical game where I played as Japan. And instead of invading China in 1936, I invaded the USSR. And then I was up to, I took Moscow, and then it was me against Poland, I think. In in East Germany, it was completely insane. And at that moment, I thought, okay, wow, now this is fun.
Yeah,
this is fun because it's completely bonkers. It's completely ahistorical. You can. I'm having Japanese tanks rolling across the Urals plains. It's fun. But yeah, there's, for one game like that, there's about 2 or 3 games where everything is just okay, and there's 2 or 3 games where everything just goes wrong in 2 or 3 hours into it, and it's frustrating.
Yeah,
and you get crushed by. You try to play as a minor nation, for example, or just one stuck in the middle, and then just get stumped over by the Nazis or the Allies,
or an ally doesn't do what you expect them to, and then you're just left out in the cold.
The AI in this game is
very frustrating. It can be okay, but it can also just be like completely off in space, and you're just like, oh no, I'm screwed now because an entire like army has walked away from my left flank.
Yeah, and I don't know why. I mean, I'm guessing it's complicated to fix. But I'm also thinking that the developers at Paradox are just having a laugh a little bit, and it's like, okay, we're gonna troll, and the AI is gonna be just so stupid, and there's a thing in the game called attrition, because basically you have to maintain, in top of everything else, you have to maintain your supply lines, which is logical. And for that, you build naval bases, you build railways, and there's a point where, especially towards the end of the the end of the war, but towards the end of 1940, for example. There's so many units, and they all take a bit of this supply line. And the allies, your allies, basically whatever you were in the allies as themselves or the Axis or whatever, they just tend to overstack, put a bunch of 50 units in one tile, and then it ends up eating all the supply, and you just cannot do anything. But the enemy cannot attack either. So
you get in these weird stalemates that don't make any sense, and there's nothing you can do.
But I'm looking at a timer here. We're coming out on 30 minutes, and I think there's a bunch more things to say about this game, good and bad.
I think so.
Before we ask our listeners to go back for part 2, which we'll record another time, I think, just to cool ourselves off, because I think
get a little worked up.
Part 4, it's getting the blood flowing. Would you still recommend Hearts of Iron 4 right now?
Honestly, yes, because I know it probably doesn't sound like this, but I had a lot of good games in this one that, were worth the initial investment. I don't know if I'd necessarily jump in and get all the DLCs right away. I think play the base game, figure out the mechanics, see how much you like, and then look at what each DLC offers and whether that's something that interests you before, spending all that money. But I think, it's still like, it offers something that no other strategy game does, that gives you a real kind of like, I'm actually controlling exactly how this works, rather than just hitting a bunch of sort of pre-planned stuff or doing really basic research where,
Yeah, completely. I mean, I would recommend it too. Get it on sale, maybe. Usually the base game is around $10. Because don't pay full price. It doesn't. No. It's not worth it. Get it. It's frequently on sale, so get it for $10. Usually the DLCs are between $5 and $10 too. So if you want to get the whole thing at once, maybe don't install it all at once. But if you want to get the whole shebang, as they say, it's maybe 40, 50, maybe $50. But don't pay more than $50. It's not. I don't think it's worth it.
No, especially if you're just trying it, because it's too much.
Yeah, it's too much. But still, it's a good game, because everything can happen. And as we will talk about in the next DLC, the next part of this conversation, there's some mods, and this opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about this next time. Thank you, Robert, for being here with me today.
Oh, my pleasure. It's nice to be back.
And maybe we'll, since everything is slowly reopening, maybe we'll do an episode at the halfway between Ottawa and Montreal. I don't know where that is.
We'll sit across the border from each other.
Yeah.
It'll be like bon cop, bad cop.
But in the meantime, thank you once again. And for everyone who is listening, thank you for being there. You can catch up on all previous episodes and DLCs on pieuvre.ca. We're also, of course, on Balado Quebec, who is hosting our podcast, and also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. See you next time.
Bye-bye.